The security guard at the Halcyon Tower didn't notice much. From the fifth-floor alley behind the tower's restaurant, he saw nothing more than a huddle of rags digging through refuse, a silhouette hunched against the biting October wind from Lake Ashmore. Trash crunched beneath a hand that fumbled through gourmet waste like it contained gold. Before I go any further, I want to ask you, please, like, share, and make sure you subscribe. Stories like mine are hard to tell, but the truth deserves to be heard. He didn't know, couldn't possibly guess, that 3 days from now, the figure before him, the woman scavenging for moldy bread, would own a penthouse on the 38th floor. He couldn't imagine that the same hand tearing crusted bread from a dumpster would soon sign checks for $8.5 million, control assets he had no concept of. But Lydia, my sister, knew. She had always known. That's why the obsidian black sedan slipped to the curb, silent as a predator. Its headlights cut through the pre-dawn gloom of Ashmore City, glinting off wet asphalt slicked from an early autumn drizzle. She didn't speak. She simply opened the door. Warm air poured from the car, carrying the scent of leather and lilies. It was intoxicating, alien, and yet faintly familiar, a memory I had long forgotten. That night, I slept in sheets of liquid silk that seemed to float around me like air itself, but I could not escape the remnants of refuse clinging to my soul, the stench of the city, the lingering sense of abandonment. The next morning, Lydia handed me an envelope. Inside, a letter, a bank transfer confirmation, and a deed. $8.5 million. A sky-high fortress in glass. My name is inscribed on every document. I was wealthy beyond imagination, yet peace was fleeting. My children, the ones who had emptied my life savings, changed the locks on my home, left me to flounder, crawled back into my life. They swore they had changed. They said they missed me. They insisted they wanted to help. This time, I wasn't their mother. I was a storm, coiled and waiting, and they had no idea what was coming. I crouched in that alley, tearing at stale bread that barely registered as food. My knees burned on the cold concrete. My back ached in a lattice of remembered pain. I wasn't hiding, not really, but I was not yet ready to be seen. The world had never been kind, and I would not step back into it without armor. Then I heard the tires. Slow, whispering, deliberate. Lydia's door didn't slam, her heels didn't click on the pavement. She simply stood there, a column of black wool against the city's gray canvas. I lifted my head only when the polished leather of her shoes came into view near my worn sneakers. That was the moment I realized this wasn't her first war. She had done this before. She knew exactly how to orchestrate transformations. The first night in the penthouse blurred into sensations. Water from the shower was scalding, peeling away layers of my skin, but I could not wash away the memory of every insult, every betrayal, every cold and hungry night I had endured. Lydia handed me the envelope the next morning, and I realized this was not a story of rescue, it was only the beginning. 3 days later, I was learning the espresso machine Lydia had installed, trying to make sense of terms like double ristretto, when the concierge buzzed. Evan and Marissa, my children, were downstairs. I don't recall walking to the mirror in the foyer, but I saw my reflection, soft, pliable, innocent-looking. A mask. The woman beneath that softness was a stranger, one who had survived the alley, survived betrayal, and was preparing for retribution. They arrived with lilies. Marissa perched delicately on the sofa, Evan prowled through the penthouse like a man inspecting a property he assumed was his. They smiled, spoke in polished tones, handed over documents and folders. I recorded everything, hiding a small voice-activated recorder beneath the console table. Every word, every lie, every suggestion of help and guidance was preserved. I let them linger, asking questions I did not answer, their attempts at manipulation filling the vast spaces of the condo. Each offer of assistance was bait. I was a predator now too, patient and calculating. The warmth of Evan's hand felt reptilian when he reached for mine. I withdrew deliberately. Marissa's soft, melodic voice spilled assurances and excuses, the same phrases she had whispered in years past when I was ill, alone, and desperate. I noted the symmetry. Nothing had changed except my vantage point. Lydia and Simon Carr, our legal strategist, prepared me fully. The Carr Resilience Trust would become a legal fortress, irrevocable, untouchable, armored against their manipulation. My wealth, my assets, my safety, none of it would be compromised again. For the first time, I was the author of my life, the architect of my protection. Evan returned alone, bearing yellow roses. He did not know they were my least favorite. I let him linger. He offered explanations, apologies, and legal documents disguised as assistance. He tried to charm, to manipulate, to appeal to a softness he believed still existed. I let him speak, let him exhaust himself, never once revealing the truth. Every word, every gesture had been recorded, every move catalogued. The quiet reception was coming. The community would bear witness. The lies would be exposed. For now, I waited. Shadows of fortune were gathering. The morning sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, turning the glass walls into mirrors reflecting both the city outside and the storm coiled within me. I sipped my espresso slowly, savoring its bitter clarity, while Lydia moved through the kitchen like a shadow anchored to purpose. She didn't hover, didn't offer commentary. She simply observed a constant presence that made the space feel simultaneously secure and alive with tension. It wasn't long before the first sign of trouble appeared. A soft chime from the concierge panel alerted me that someone had arrived. Marissa, my eldest, had come alone this time. She carried a paper bag from La Fleur Patisserie, the city's most exclusive bakery. Croissants, warm and buttery, exhaled a scent that was almost weaponized in its domestic familiarity. Her hair was curled just so, her sweater a pale cashmere, exactly the shade she once said made me look washed out. She stepped past me into the living room, moving with an unspoken confidence that assumed control of the space. I let her. She placed the pastry bag on the marble countertop, then her eyes swept across the penthouse. A flicker of envy crossed her face, subtle, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. The child who had once manipulated and belittled me could not mask her fear entirely. Her voice was soft, measured, sweet, the voice that had once coaxed guilt from me like liquid from a cracked vessel. She asked how I had been sleeping, if I'd been getting enough air, if I'd eaten breakfast, if Lydia had been around. She suggested, in clipped, rehearsed phrasing, that I might benefit from having a senior care advocate review my documents, now that my circumstances had changed so dramatically. She presented a glossy pamphlet, the kind of carefully curated gift that promised assistance while implying incompetence. I let her chatter fill the air, letting it curl around me without reaching me. I didn't touch the pamphlet. I didn't acknowledge the manipulations. I let the silence of my restraint speak. Later that afternoon, Lydia arrived, her gaze immediately assessing the situation. She saw the pastry bag in the trash can, a single millisecond of narrowed eyes, and then neutrality returned. She sat at the island, sipped her espresso, and waited. I told her everything. Every cloying word of Marissa's solo visit, every offer of help, every insinuation that I was incapable. Lydia listened silently, her presence like steel tempered in shadow. When I finished, she pulled her phone from her bag and sent 2 short texts. Then she asked me if I still had the folder Evan had brought with the previous documents. I handed it to her. She opened it with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an incision. Inside were pre-filled forms for power of attorney, bank authorizations, and healthcare proxies, all ready for me to sign. The return address for the financial planner was typed neatly, but the phone number was handwritten in a shaky scrawl, clearly intended to create trust through a facade of intimacy. Lydia's next move surprised me. She produced a small metal bowl and a lighter. In a controlled flick of the wrist, she burned the folder. Black ash drifted like snow across the polished marble floor. I realized then that this was not her first war. She had fought battles like this before, and she had always won. The following morning, Simon Carr arrived, crisp button-down, sleeves rolled, coffee in hand, legal pad poised. He did not offer sympathy. He did not speak slowly as though I were fragile. He was precise, professional, and utterly effective. We reviewed the foundation he had prepared for me, dissecting every asset, every account, every hidden fund Lydia had arranged without my knowledge. By evening, the Car Resilience Trust was irrevocable, legally armored against any fraudulent or manipulative attempt. I slept that night knowing my life had been fortified, yet I felt no triumph, only readiness. The storm was gathering, and I would meet it with preparation, patience, and precision. 2 days later, Evan returned. This time, he bore yellow roses, my least favorite, a detail he had never cared to learn. He came alone, stepping into the penthouse with practiced charm, tilting his head as though he still owned space he had long abandoned. He lingered by the windows, commenting on the cascades in the distance, before launching into a tale of stress and regret. The volatile market. Financial strain. The pressures of raising children in a chaotic world. He lamented the past, weaving sincerity with deception, his every word calculated. He placed another folder on the counter, this one containing a family care agreement and an asset protection plan. He explained each clause, likely misunderstanding most of it himself, presenting the documents as gifts of convenience and shared responsibility. I nodded, letting him believe he had one. Each detail of his pitch was recorded, each gesture catalogued. I allowed him the illusion of control, letting him exhaust himself against a foundation that had been prepared to withstand him. By that evening, Simon had filed the foundation paperwork, and Lydia had paid the expedited fees. Within 24 hours, all accounts were locked under nonprofit legal protections. Any attempt by an unauthorized party would trigger an immediate flag and alert a federal oversight committee. The fortress was in place. The first public confrontation came at a small reception Lydia hosted in the Halcyon Towers Grand Hall. Drinks, appetizers, polite introductions, a soft welcome into the building's social ecosystem. Lydia orchestrated movement through the crowd with a conductor's precision, keeping me centered but free, guiding the tempo without overt interference. Evan and Marissa arrived 20 minutes later, polished, confident, and smiles just a little too bright. They greeted neighbors and staff, unaware that the room itself would soon serve as a courtroom. The projector screen hung silently behind me, ready to reveal their manipulations. When they reached me, Evan complimented my strength and expressed pride. Marissa cooed about the beauty of the penthouse, the view, and the second chance our family supposedly had. I let the words hang in the air, weighed them, observed them, all the while feeling the coiled tension in my chest. Marcus stepped in seamlessly, guiding them to a seating area. Their confidence wavered subtly as the first video began to play, a recording of Evan presenting documents at my kitchen table, his voice calm, rehearsed, outlining how helpful it would be to have access to my finances. The second clip showed Marissa offering guidance from the senior advocacy pamphlet, framing her interference as concern. The third showed Evan planting the narrative with the concierge, implying I was incompetent, needing oversight. The room went utterly silent. Eyes widened. Conversation ceased. Every lie laid bare. I spoke calmly, this isn't revenge. It's protection. For every woman, every mother who has been treated like property, this is accountability. Evan and Marissa's faces drained of color. They understood, too late, that the woman they thought they could manipulate was no longer the same. They had tried to control a ghost, and the ghost had teeth. By the time the crowd had absorbed what they saw, Evan and Marissa had vanished into the elevator, leaving only echoes of disbelief. I remained, silent, grounded, no longer erased. The storm had begun, and the first waves had broken in perfect symmetry. The city lights of Ashmore City glittered like scattered stars through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The wind from Lake Ashmore whispered against the glass, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and the distant murmur of early evening traffic. For the first time in years, I sat in my fortress not with anxiety, not with fear, but with a stillness that was entirely my own. The storm had passed, or at least, the first waves had, and I was ready to observe its aftermath. The reception had left ripples. Whispers in the building's halls, quiet conversations among neighbors, subtle nods from staff who had watched the drama unfold, everyone sensed that something had changed. Not just me. Something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer a passive participant in the currents of my life. I had become their force, silent but undeniable. It began early the next morning. Evan, audacious as always, returned with a calculated calm, bearing a briefcase and the faintest whiff of desperation. He had come expecting to charm, to negotiate, to reclaim the influence he once wielded over me. Marissa trailed shortly after, her appearance polished, her smile carefully measured, carrying another bakery bag, another offer of assistance cloaked in concern. I let them approach, letting the calm in my chest extend into my posture, my gaze. Lydia was nearby, a sentinel, but I didn't need her interference. Simon Carr had prepared the legal framework perfectly. Every asset, every account, every contingency was locked, armored, and strategically layered. They had no power here, no leverage. Evan began with his practiced charm, speaking of markets, stress, regrets. He laid out proposals as if they were innocuous gestures of reconciliation. Marissa offered counsel, her voice soft, melodic, still attempting to wrap control around me under the guise of care. Each phrase, each gesture, was catalogued in my mind, a record of intent, manipulation, and betrayal. I let the words linger in the space between us. I observed their expressions, noting micro-expressions of frustration, envy, and fear. They believed themselves in control, unaware that every move they made was anticipated, countered, and nullified. I spoke finally, my voice calm and deliberate. The Carr Resilience Trust exists to protect not only my assets but my autonomy. Any attempt to circumvent it is already documented and legally actionable. Your roles in my life have changed. You are no longer my decision makers, nor will you be. You are witnesses, as I have become. A flash of disbelief crossed Evan's face. Marissa's lips parted in a silent gasp. They had always underestimated me. Always assumed that the soft facade, the pliable exterior, was a weakness. It was not. I gestured toward the small podium where the projector rested, and the videos played again, clips of their past manipulations, recorded from my kitchen, from the concierge, from hidden vantage points I had carefully prepared. The evidence was irrefutable, clean, precise. There was no emotion in it, only truth. Neighbors watched in stunned silence, some with curiosity, some with quiet admiration. The building staff, too, recognized the significance of what was happening. A long-standing predator-prey dynamic had been inverted. Evan rose abruptly, attempting to speak, to justify, to charm. I held his gaze, unwavering. It's too late for an explanation. It's time for accountability. Marissa's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edges of her purse. She had thought control was still possible, but the law, combined with my preparation, left them utterly powerless. I turned away, signaling the conclusion without fanfare. They understood, they had lost. The rest of the evening passed in a quiet blur. Conversations resumed cautiously, soft jazz floating through the hall. Lydia moved discreetly among the guests, ensuring the flow remained calm and contained. Simon Carr remained in the background, a silent guardian ensuring that the legal ramifications were preserved for any future transgressions. As the reception wound down, I found myself alone in the penthouse. The city stretched below, twinkling with life, indifferent to the battles that had unfolded high above. I sat in my favorite chair, the soft hum of the HVAC system and the distant ferry horn forming a lullaby of autonomy. For the first time, I felt entirely untouchable, not in arrogance, but in security. My life, my decisions, my dignity, were mine alone. The storm that had been brewing for decades had broken. I had survived every attempt at manipulation, every betrayal, every carefully crafted lie. I had emerged not as the mother they could control, not as the woman they had discarded, but as a force they could neither predict nor contain. Days passed, and the whispers in the building grew louder. Port Ashmore was not a small city, but in circles of old money and new tech, the right story traveled fast. The Vance Resilience Trust, quietly registered, began to serve its purpose, providing legal fortification and practical protection for those at risk of exploitation. The press release Lydia had prepared circulated discreetly, planting seeds of awareness and caution in the community. Evan and Marissa did not return. Their absence was itself a lesson, a quiet acknowledgement that their old tactics no longer held sway. They had encountered a ghost they could not manipulate, a woman forged in the crucible of betrayal and empowered by strategy, foresight, and sheer will. I moved through my days with deliberate calm. I learned the espresso machine, navigated the city's rhythms, and embraced the penthouse as a space not only of luxury but of safety. Lydia remained close, a constant reminder that preparation and vigilance were as important as resilience and courage. Simon Carr monitored the legal framework, ensuring that every document, every clause, every contingency was airtight. And yet, for all the structure, for all the legal fortifications, the most important element of my triumph was not external. It was internal. I no longer needed approval, validation, or fear of their disapproval. I had reclaimed my identity, my autonomy, my narrative. I had turned the tools of betrayal into instruments of empowerment. I often sat by the windows at night, gazing at the dark waters of Lake Ashmore reflecting city lights like fractured constellations. The past was no longer a chain, it was a reference point, a reminder of how far I had come. Each memory of betrayal, each lingering shadow of neglect or cruelty, had been transformed into vigilance, strategy, and ultimately, freedom. In that quiet, luminous space, I understood the true power of patience, preparation, and observation. The ghost of the alley was no longer scavenging for survival, she had become a guardian of her own destiny. The storm had not only passed, it had been harnessed. And for the first time in my life, I was untouchable. You know, I've carried this story quietly for decades, like a river flowing beneath ice, silent, hidden, shaping the landscape of who I am without ever being seen. I didn't tell it before, because some truths are like fragile seeds, they need the right soil, the right season, to grow without being crushed. And perhaps I was still learning how to stand tall in my own shadow. But tonight, I speak because the weight of silence has been heavy enough for one lifetime. If you are listening, if you have known betrayal, or loss, or the quiet erosion of your own dignity, know this: the night may be long, but dawn always arrives. You can plant your own roots. You can reclaim what was taken, and even the coldest soil can bloom again. Legacy is not only what we leave behind in gold or glass, it is the courage in our actions, the stories we survive to tell, the quiet strength that can whisper across generations. I tell you this now, not for pity, but so that someone, somewhere, might find hope in these words. That someone might see that storms do not break the trees that bend with them, they grow stronger. So, if you have walked with me tonight through these alleys of memory and shadow, I ask you gently, like, comment, share, or subscribe, not for me, but so that the stories of those who survive can reach others who need them. And now, I rest this tale, tucked into the folds of memory where it belongs. You may call me Eleanor Vance, or simply, a woman who has risen from her own ashes. May the quiet of this moment linger, and may every ending you've endured whisper the promise of a new beginning.